Kia ora mai koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for joining us here today. A little bit of technical problems, but now we've sorted. Me te mata te karakia tuatahi. No mai e raro, kia hā ki roto, kia hā ki waho. Kia tau mai te Māori tū, te Māori noho, te Māori tangata, te Māori atua. Kia tau mai te ao, kia tauma te marama, kia hua mai mā te katoa. Haumie, huie, tākia. He karakia tēnei no te atawhai tibble, kia ora mō tēnā te atawhai. Ko au, he uru tāku no te tairawhiti, no te tanga mahaki, no te Aotearoa hoki, engari kei te noho au ki ōtaki, no te me tēnā, kei anā te Raukawa taku nākau. Thank you so much everyone for joining us from your tari, bedrooms, libraries, workplaces. It's really special to have you here with us. If you could please disable any AI whānau, that would be really appreciated. And during the webinar, we have a series of interactive pārtai and questions that we might pose to you, and please feel free to use the interactive Q&A. This series of webinar, we're going to try and capture the richness of this kōrero and create a resource with you, and we'd like your help to help us do this. So this will sit alongside these next three webinars. And what that means, whānau, is that some of your kōrero will be added to the final product, in particular responses to the pārtai, curious questions that you might have, and in particular any feed forward that keeps us all thinking and learning together. So the idea is that we won't put names to this kōrero, so there won't be any names mentioned. Rather, if you can think of it as a collection and a curation of our time together over the next three webinars. If you do not want your whakaaro shared or your questions shared, I still encourage you to participate in the chat, in the Q&A, sorry, but please put perhaps at the other end of it, not for sharing. We want to respect your data sovereignty. Yeah, kia ora. Today we want you to be fully present. So waihona pepa, waihona pene, and just need your tarangas today, whānau, and an open mind. Before we start our webinar, let's try and create a space where we can fully be present with a grounding exercise. Oh, I might need it myself actually. So this is a grounding exercise from Huapara Kore that we've just adapted. Ngā mihi kia koe pounamu. So whānau, make yourself comfortable. Close your eyes, relax your shoulders and your arms, and I invite you to bring attention to your whole self. Take 3 deep breaths in. Kia haupai ki roto. Kia haupai ki waho. And again, kia haupai ki roto. Kia haupai ki waho. One last time. Kia haupai ki roto. Kia haupai ki waho. So let's take a moment and visit our internal māra. Close your eyes if you wish. In your mind, take yourself to a māra kai, or a place where you've seen or gathered or experienced wairua nourishing kai. It could be the moana, it could be your awa, it could be walking in the ngahere, a neighbour's house, your marae, or simply your backyard, or your favourite place in Aotearoa. There are many places of noho pupu whānau. Find one where you can focus. So once you're there, let's bring in the colour waiporoporo, or purple, into your mind and surround the special place in waiporoporo. Waiporoporo today represents whakapapa. Whakapapa represents the natural connection between atua, whenua, kai, and yourself. Whakapapa is about genealogy and our connection to our tupuna. It is about seeds, sovereignty, shimmering power shells, intense kuri, tutai kuri taiwa, flowering koromiko, and our night skies before dusk. what else can you see that represents whakapapa? Now we bring in the colour kikorangi, or the colour blue. Today, kikorangi represents wairua, the spiritual health and peace of where you are. Kikorangi represents harmony, serenity, and dreaming and imagination. It's a place of high trust and guidance. Where can you see kikorangi where you are? Is it the tuna swiftly glistening in the waterways? Could it be the tui sweeping past you? Or perhaps it's the blue borage hosting our pollinators. Now we bring in the colour kakariki. Today, kakariki represents mana. Mana is about the autonomy of growing your own kai and being able to feed yourself and your whānau to move towards kai motuhake. Kakariki today represents growth. He kai, he rongo, mana o te tiriti, he mana tō te kai. Slowly come back into the room, whānau, acknowledging your breath once again, and when you are ready, please open your eyes. So hopefully everyone has left the day behind and you can join us in this space for the next hour and a bit. If you can pop in the chat whose tribal lands that you're joining us from today, perhaps where you're from, and where you went to in that meditative exercise, where was the places of noho poku for you? Kia ora whānau. So, kore Hiakai are often asked, what has Kai got to do with Te Tiriti or Waitangi? And today we're going to listen to our manuhiri to understand further what that looks like authentically in our mahi. We know that Te Tiriti shaped Māori relationships to Kai, how colonisation disrupted those systems, and how today's food inequities are not accidental but historical and deliberate outcomes. Now, I know there's many resources, and I know that we've all been reading and trying to understand some of them. One of the resources that Kore Hiakai put together is Kai Motuhake, the starting place to tackle the legacy of colonisation in Aotearoa. And hopefully some of you have read this. And it's always helpful to revisit and rethink and explore our journey together. Kore Hiakai are committed to doing this. It's not something that, you know, you can kind of read once and get. I think can be a long, slow process, but it doesn't have to be. I think about the Māori researcher Shirley Simons, who likens it, our Te Tiriti journey, like a first aid certificate where we, you know, constantly do it all the time, and it's not necessarily a one-off that you can do. So today it's important we start at the beginning and we start with facts. This isn't about blame or shame. This is about truth-telling and looking to the past to understand our future. So we're going to start with Carwyn and Ngaio. Korua, could you please introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about the mahi that you are both doing in your respective areas, please? I'm keen for our listeners to understand the company that we're with today, and thank you so much for joining us. Kia koe te rākau e Ngaio, me timata, and Carwyn, if you can follow Ngaio, that would be appreciated. Ngā mihi. She's on mute. Oh, Taiho and Ngaio, I just need to stop you for a minute. We just got you're on mute. Ah, kia ora. Oh, look at that. We get to hear that twice. Thank you, honey.
Kia ora. Aroha, I'm on my phone, unfortunately, because I have had some great tech issues this morning. Engari, e mana hau o te rā, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I whakapapa au ki ngā tangata o Ngāti Tiata te Waiohua, me Waikato, me Ngāti Whatua, me Ngāti Parau hoki. Engari, e tipu aki au ki Oto Tahi, e noho ana au ki o hini hau I Ngaia nei. Aira ko Ngaio tōku ingoa. So my name is Ngaio. I call myself a Haututū because I do too many things, and it's quite hard to define. Primarily, I work as a ringatoi for my iwi and tamaki makaurau, working in the space of te whare pora in large-scale sculptural works. I also work as a lecturer and a tutor down here in Ōtautahi at 3 different university spaces, so University of Canterbury, Lincoln University, and the BHU, which is a subsidiary of Lincoln University. I also co-run a organisation called Boil Up, which is a accessible Kai, nostalgic Kai experience, which is a non-for-profit where we create a nostalgic boil up experience for people around the motu. I am doing my master's at the moment in Māori and Indigenous leadership, and I am focusing on decolonising toi and its place in a Pākehā art system. My background is in graphic design and kai growing, so yeah, that's me. Kia ora.
Kia ora e hoa.
Tēnā tātou, ngā mihi mai oha ki a koutou, ko Carwyn Jones tōku ingoa, he uri ahau o Ngāti Kahununu ki te Wairoa, he kaimahi ahau o te Wānanga o Raukawa i nei, e noho ana ahau I Pōneke. So my name's Carwyn. I work at te Wānanga o Raukawa, and I teach into the Ahunga Tikanga program there, which is the Māori laws and philosophy program. My background is in law. I've focused primarily on issues relating to Te Tiriti or Waitangi, but also thinking about Indigenous legal orders and particularly thinking about what it means to take seriously the idea of tikanga as a system of law. And so I've done some work around issues to do with the Waitangi Tribunal, treaty claims and settlements, constitutional issues. I was part of the Mātake Mai Aotearoa group led by Moana Jackson and Margaret Mutu. And yeah, so those are the kinds of issues that I have worked on and continue to work on. Kia ora koutou.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you so much. It's yeah, really wonderful to have such experience in the room, and you know, access to both of you. You know, often the NGO space is you know, under-resourced, and so it's lovely to be able to share this kōrero with you today. So Ngaio, where would you like to start? Let's start with you, and let's start at the beginning and take us through, paint the picture of Kai and Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Start where you'd like to, and yes, share some whakaaro with us and paint the picture for us. Kia ora.
Yeah, kia ora. So we had a couple of wānanga before this where we discussed how we wanted to format this. These webinars, and we thought we'd start at the beginning. And whenever I teach, I always like to start at the beginning and start with Te Tiriti o Waitangi in its most rudimentary form, I suppose, and breaking it down. I'm a bit of a language nerd as well, so I really like to look at the specifics of the document. So we thought today that we would start with what actually happened on February 6th, in 1840, and what led to it and how that's affected things going forward. So it's probably going to be a little bit wordy and a little bit technical. I was literally just reading an act just before I jumped on the Zoom. That's probably what happened with my tech, reading an act from 1837. So I wanted to start straight from the beginning, and this is generally like a condensed 3-hour lecture within an hour, but still going to be like a Wānanga space, so to have people to engage with it as well. But what I wanted to start with is what happened, what Aotearoa looked like before Te Tiriti or Waitangi. And what I find is really important is who are Māori, where did Māori come from, and what does the term mean? The term Māori, or the kupu Māori, was given to us by Tupaia, who was one of Captain Cook's, the main navigator for Captain Cook, who came from Tahiti. And the kupu Māori means normal. So when Captain Cook arrived here, trying to, suss out some land, he asked Tupaia who these people were, and he said, Māori, they're normal. And so that kupu is quite an interesting one. And there's going to be a few different kupu that will come up in this that I will point out. But I find it interesting now that we're called Māori, but before that we used hapu and iwi-based kupu, referred to each other as our hapu or iwi. So like Ngāti Tiata or, Ngāti Kahanunu. But it was a way of distinguishing us from Pākehā. So Pākehā meaning foreign as well. So before that, we didn't have any singular race that we talked about. Our first contact, we had obviously Mr. Cook, and we had the Banks that came here. And then we had all the settlers come over from Sydney. At this time, pre-Te Tiriti signing, it was relatively peaceful until we had a few conflicts. And literally where I'm sitting now, because I'm in Ohiniho or Littleton in the Banks Peninsula, quite a significant conflict that had British influence in it, which led to Te Tiriti. It was one of the main contributing factors. So we had Te Rauparaha from Pōneke come down, and was supported by British, I don't know what we call them, British traders in terms of what they did down here. I'm not too sure how familiar people are with it, but essentially a whole whānau, or basically most of the iwi and the hapu around the Banks Peninsula or Te Pātaka o Raukawa Haututū were essentially wiped out with support of British soldiers, traders, particularly over in Akaroa. There was a particular incident where they took a chief, and they also took his daughter and his wife, and there was quite a significant amount of violence. Actually, to the point where it was reported back to Queen Victoria, and she was completely upset with what had happened, and that's what sort of led into writing a document to support or look after Māori and Pākehā relationships within Aotearoa. So technically speaking, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, it's an agreement between the British Crown and the rangatira of Aotearoa and their people. So the people that sit underneath the rangatira of Aotearoa that signed it. The document itself consists of 3 articles with a foreword and a conclusion. It was written by Lieutenant Governor William Hobson, which people are probably familiar with that last name at the moment, and it was created with James Busby as well. It was translated by Henry Williams and William Williams, which I always feel a little bit sorry for William Williams. Like, I think his father shouldn't have called him William, but that's fine. There's 7 different versions in Te Reo Māori that travelled around. But the main document was signed on the 6th of February, 1840. Sorry, I'm just reading my slides while I'm going through it. So at the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, there were 540 rangatira present at the time. 3 Pākehā signatories were there as well, including Hobson. Now, the main thing that I always get stuck up on is the translation of this. I've spoke before about it being about language. So Henry Williams and William Williams had 65 hours to translate the document that was written into Te Reo Māori. Another point of significance for me is they had already translated He Whakapūtanga, which is the Declaration of Independence, mainly signed by the Northern tribes, but they had already translated a document. And they also had already used certain kupu that speak to sovereignty. And so there's differences in the language with what they've used in Te Tiriti or Waitangi versus He Whakapūtanga. So they did have the knowledge about what those languages looked like. So the structure of Te Tiriti of Waitangi, we've got the forward, which is the laydown of the terms, who it is, who's it between. Article 1 is discusses the structure of governance under the Crown. This is the most rudimentary way of explaining it, but I'm doing it. Article 2 discusses the remaining ownership of lands with Māori and how it would pass to the Crown, as well as the distribution of Kai and Taonga. And Article 3 gave Māori the rights and privileges of British subjects. And then we also have the conclusion after that. So in Article 1, in terms of translations in English, the treaty in Māori gave Queen Victoria kawanatanga. So kawanatanga is governance over the land. Kawanatanga is a modern kupu in Te Reo Māori. So it is a translation of governorship, which is not a word that we would have used prior to colonisation. So it's a word that's completely come fresh into this. Actually, Henry Williams, Williams came up with this kupu as part of a translation of the Bible as well. So this is a biblical term that has come into Te Tiriti or Waitangi. In Te Reo Māori, it says Māori give Queen Victoria te kawanatanga katoa, which is complete governance over the land. Essentially, there's a difference between sovereignty and kawanatanga. So sovereignty being looking at one monarch, which is completely different from what we look at in Te Ao Māori, or what we did look at in Te Ao Māori. And yeah, it's also just like a new word that was made up to fit purpose within Te Tiriti o Waitangi in that first article. But then we get into the good one, which is Article 2. So in Article 2, Te Tiriti is guaranteed in Te Reo Māori, guaranteed rangatiratanga or tino rangatiratanga, full rights of chieftainship is how it translates, over their lands, villages, taonga, treasured things. It also gave the Crown preemption or the right to deal with Māori in purchasing land. So that's another kupu, rangatiratanga or rangatira. Rangatira literally means to weave people. So rāranga tanga being the end of tangata, rāranga tanga, like it means to weave people together. But tino rangatiratanga was never used properly in like colloquial te reo prior to Te Tiriti or Waitangi. Now we're really lucky that we've reclaimed it. Obviously we've got our lovely hake behind me, that we're using this kupu, but it wasn't a kupu that was used prior to this. In whakapūtanga, He Whakapūtanga, they used a different kupu, which actually was an older kupu. So te mana nā mana katoa o rangatira. So that means like the complete mana of chieftainship. rather than this sort of version that has come up within this article. So I always find it quite interesting that the same translator changed his kupu. Already had a traditional kupu, or one of our kupu that he altered. And what, obviously I wasn't there, but I feel as though he was probably pressured to use a more modern term that suited the British ideal at the time. Yes, so I have a bit of an issue with that one. I literally have it tattooed on my body. Yeah, ngā mana katoa o rangatira is the actual proper te reo term for me for sovereignty, our sovereignty, not the English version of it. So then going back to the translation, essentially Māori were not told the correct thing. It was a new kupu, a new thing. In the English version as well, they used rangatira essentially, but they talked about, in terms of land distribution in the taonga part of it, they talked about exclusive and undisturbed possession of lands, forests, fisheries, and other property. So we just have to look at the, Foreshore and Seabed Act in terms of Kai with that, and looking at what's happening now in terms of mining and things like that as well. But the Crown was also given exclusive rights to deal with Māori in terms of purchase. So that's a really key part of it. So whenever Māori had land, the first right to purchase it was under Pākehā. So under the British Crown, they had the first right to buy any land. The third article is generally pretty standard. It always talks about giving them the right of being British subjects, the rights and privileges of being British subjects. That's where my ration the Queen veggies tattoo comes from, which is about that amazing piece of art that happened at Te Papa. I'm going to call it a piece of art. But that was a really thoughtful and amazing response to that installation, I suppose, which was disrupted. Well, actually, Dr. Moana Jackson recommended against that whole exhibition. So, yeah. But the main differences, I suppose, like within the three articles is kawanatanga versus sovereignty. What is tino rangatiratanga? And te mana katoa o ngā rangatira. And then the main thing as well that I think about the actual signing of it is to remember that it was translated in such a short time frame, probably under immense pressure as well. You imagine what Hobson's sitting over your shoulder while you're translating. Henry Williams had translated He Whakaputanga before. And Te Tiriti was verbally explained as well to the rangatira on site. So that's something I didn't mention, but the way that the Te Tiriti was delivered to the rangatira on site at Waitangi was verbally. What follows after is what really in my personal opinion, is what the Kai space. So we have a whole series of acts that come through that really sort of aggravate things, and particularly looking at it in the Kai space. So in 1816, we have the first missionary schools. And then 1846, we have the Constitutional Act, which is where the Governor of New Zealand, Governor Grey, which many of you probably have heard of, argued that the Constitutional Act would place Māori majority under the political control of settlers to make them feel more comfortable and help them out. So we're looking back to another narrative of Alston Best, who I always think of, who talks about the noble savage. And this is sort of the first sort of line where they think, well, not the first line, but it's what I think of when they wanted to, they think they're doing the best in terms of colonization and trying to help Māori. And it really sort of, it didn't work well. It was rewritten 2 years later and it was a little bit softer, but it was still not a great document. Still affects to this day. And then in 1862, we've got the Native Lands Act, which is a doozy. It was an act of parliament in New Zealand that was designed to remove Māori land and ownership. So essentially to own land at this time, you needed to be male, you needed to speak English and write English, and you needed to own land by yourself, and you needed to, it was just essentially what they did, they would post up land in Europe, like Pākehā settlements, they would post up posters saying this land's up for sale, and they would, it was like not a point of access for Māori to be able to go there, because most of us were illiterate at the time, because we're not a written and we're an oral language, and it was just a way of making sure that we couldn't buy land. And it also was just a foreign concept to us that we had to own land as one person, because we are like ko au te whenua, ko te whenua, ko au. We are the whenua and the whenua is us. Then we have in 1863, the New Zealand Settlements Act. So this law was passed in technically December 1863, and it allowed the confiscation of land without compensation. And then we also have the Suppression of Rebellion Act. So for me personally, this is one of my big ones, these two, because it relates specifically to Waikato and Raupatu. So Raupatu is the land stealing of Waikato. Essentially, they created a system of 2 acts to illegally, in my opinion, take most of the Waikato and Tamaki Makaurau as well. The Settlements Act was a law passed after the fact as well. Both of these were passed after the fact of what they've done, where they were allowed to confiscate land without compensation in the North Island. And then the Rebellion Act said that anyone that had rebellious behaviour would relate into the Settlements Act. So essentially what they did is they took a whole bunch of land and then they wrote the act at the end of the year. So that one's a doozy for me. Then after that, we've got a whole bunch of different things that come through. So we've got Te Reo Māori being banned in schools in 1903, the Tohunga Suppression Act, which is in 1907. We've got the Native Schools Act in 1958. And then we have the Waitangi Settlement Act in 1975. But that's essentially the nitty-gritty of the main thing. So yeah, now I'm open. Now it's Wānanga time. I've got enough.
Kia ora. I'm really glad, A, that we're recording this, and B, that we're creating a resource from that, because there was so much in that kōrero and a lot to absorb. So thank you for setting the scene there, e hoa. Depending where your tattoo is, so I might have to have a show and tell, because I'm a little bit curious, and I'm sure the audience is as well. Let's have a wee look.
Can you see it?
Thank you for sharing. Thank you, Ngaio. Two things. Can you just repeat, you talked about that we didn't really use the word tino rangi tiratanga. can you repeat the word that was used in Te Whakaputanga for me? And then what I'm hearing as you're talking is, and I think it's really good for us to remember in our food sector, is that as Māori, we're not stakeholders, we're right holders. And you talk about our rights all the way through that. Kia ora. So if you can remind me of that kupu just in just a minute. And then I'm just going to go to the chat, and I just want to ask everyone online a pātai, and if you're thinking about what Ngaio just shared with us and what you know from your own knowledge and your own research, a pātai I just want to ask is, when Te Tiriti was signed, what understandings did Māori have about continued authority over whenua, Wai and Kai? So Ngaio's painted a really good picture about that. So Ngaio, if you can repeat that word that you used, that we didn't use Tino Rangatiratanga. And then after that, Carwyn, can I ask you to jump in and as well, start us from the beginning and add to that, or take us somewhere else? Kei koe te rākau.
Cool. So the kupu is ngā mana katoa o ngā rangatira.
Ora.
And what was the other pātai, sorry?
I think that was it. Yeah, I think that was it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Kia ora, Carwyn.
Oh, kia ora. Well, Ngaio's done a great job of condensing her usual fuller description down to some really important key points there, and taking us from Te Tiriti right through to those important pieces of legislation that followed. And I think really important to focus in on those kupu in Te Tiriti, as Ngaio has pointed us to, and to compare to some of the language used in He Whakaputanga. I think He Whakaputanga is a really important kind of foundation for talking about Te Tiriti as well. I heard at Waitangi, I think it was Hone Sadler, one of the kaumātua there, who talked about how He Whakaputanga is not just, he said, it's not a tuakana to Te Tiriti, it's not an older sibling to Te Tiriti, but it's the Matua, it's the parent of Te Tiriti. And of course, for those in the north, as Ngaio pointed out, He Whakaputanga was primarily signed by rangatira from the north, so it holds a particularly important place there as well. But one of the things I think is really important about He Whakaputanga is that it sets out that foundation, a statement to the rest of the world about the authority of the rangatira, makes it really clear that the rangatira are stating collectively that to the rest of the world that they are the ones who exercise authority, governmental authority, legal, constitutional, political authority here in Aotearoa. And they make it really clear that, that it's us collectively that exercise it and nobody else, they say. And I think that's really important, because then when we come to Te Tiriti, we can see that grant of an authority of kāwanatanga is sort of opening up a space for another sphere of authority to coexist with that ongoing Māori authority. So as Ngaio was talked to us about, the two really big concepts in Te Tiriti, I tend to think of as being kāwanatanga and tino rangatiratanga. And so that tino rangatiratanga being that ongoing Māori authority, guaranteed in quite clear terms. And I think, although the English text tends to have a kind of focus on property rights and tangible things, I think really important that we understand tino rangatiratanga as being much broader than that. It's a political authority. It's not just about property rights. And so that's being retained by the rangatira. And then what's being granted to the British Crown, this authority of kāwanatanga, is not an authority that's going to sit over the top of Te Rangatira. In fact, when you look at as the Waitangi Tribunal has done, looks at the kind of record of the discussion and the explanations that took place about the meaning of Te Tiriti at the signing in different places around the country, you know, that it's the tribunal says what was explained to Māori was that Hāwanatanga would be the authority of the British Crown to exercise over their own people, so over the settler population that was here. And that's consistent with that kind of guarantee of ongoing Māori authority. And so even a couple of the signing spots where there wasn't a te reo version of Te Tiriti available and an English text, the English text was signed, but still that explanation all took place in te reo Māori, and the tribunal says so. For that reason, their view was pretty clear that Māori weren't ceding sovereignty, as Ngaio's talked to us about. You know, that's a very different kind of concept of authority anyway. But we're allowing the Crown to exercise its authority over its own people that were here. And so I think that, and the other thing I'd say about the language stuff that Ngaio's pointed us towards already is you know, that use of tino rangatiratanga being a different term to how we see ideas of sovereignty and independence being used in he whakaputanga. You know, we're not, he whakaputanga talks about mana, whereas the Te Tiriti uses the term tino rangatiratanga. And I think it's would have been clear to Henry Williams that if he had said to the rangatira, oh, you're going to, in he whakaputanga, sovereignty is described as mana. In Te Tiriti, that Article 1 sovereignty in the English text, which has been granted to the Crown, the translation that's used is kāwanatanga. So it's an authority of kāwanatanga that's being granted. And I think it's pretty clear that Henry Williams would have known that if he'd said to the rangatira, you're going to give your mana to Queen Victoria, they would have told him he was crazy. Firstly, they wouldn't want to do that, but secondly, probably kind of conceptually impossible to do, right? And so that's why, undoubtedly, that's why we see some different language being used to describe that kind of concept of sovereignty in Te Tiriti. And then, just to pick up on where Ngaio was talking about the various pieces of legislation as well, I think that's a really important part of the story, is to recognise the way then that kind of improper assumption of authority over Māori then gets translated into these legal tools which are used to both control Māori, assimilate Māori, and dispossess Māori of lands. And Ngaio talked specifically about legislation like the New Zealand Settlements Act, which provided for confiscations to take place, and many people will know about the raupatu, but just as importantly, as Ngaio talked about, is the native land legislation in the 1860s, which was specifically intended to make Māori land easy to buy and sell, and did a very effective job of alienating Māori land through that process as well. And we're still, the Native Land Court is now the Māori Land Court, and has changed its focus, but much of the issues that the Māori Land Court is dealing with today are through the consequences of the kind of individualization of title that Ngaio talked about as well. but that might be all that I might add on that part.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Carwyn. You made some really interesting points, and I really like picking back on the impact of language and use of language, authority and kawanatanga. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, or is there something that came up for you, Ngaio, before I want to talk a bit about one word that hasn't come up, and we see a lot in our food sector, in our kai sector. You know, we talk a lot about tikanga, and Carwyn, you've spoken a lot about tikanga being the first law of Aotearoa in some of your other writings. So, you know, we recognise that tikanga has a legal system, but could you talk to us a little bit about that? But I'll let Ngaio, if you wanted to add anything before you talk, please, Ngaio.
No, ka pai.
Yeah, sorry, Carwyn. Yeah, the word tikanga comes up a lot, and I just want to quickly, well, not quickly, I'd just like to explore that a little bit more. And like I said, you've used the concept as, well, tikanga as being the first law of Aotearoa. And at Te Raukawa, your whatarangi weniata always talked to, you know, students about Te Tiriti or Waitangi that supersedes any legislation. So I don't want to jump forward too much, but I think a few texts is about where does tikanga come into this, and so I thought I might just place that in the room if that's okay.
Bye. Yeah, I mean, I think so. That's a really important piece of the conversation, I think, is the recognition that tikanga is the first law of Aotearoa, and it's a phrase that my colleague Ani Mikaere came up with and we all use, because partly it's important we think about that and understand that, because sometimes there can be a tendency to diminish tikanga by saying it doesn't have legal force. And, you know, within the New Zealand legal system, it's not enforced, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have legal force. It doesn't mean that there aren't real obligations that flow from it. It doesn't mean that there aren't processes for responding to harm or dealing with situations of conflict or maintaining social relationships. And actually, of course, both land and food play an important part in understanding that network of relationships and maintaining those relationships in the system of tikanga as well. And it's important, I think, when we're talking about Te Tiriti and tino rangatiratanga, to think about what is this authority of tino rangatiratanga and what does it mean? And at the heart of it, I would say, is what it means is understanding the authority of tikanga. It's recognizing that tikanga is a legal system. It has all the features of a legal system that we would expect. And so then when we come to thinking about, well, what's the relationship between kāwanatanga and tino rangatiratanga, we don't need to subsume tikanga. We don't need to put it on a lower level than the laws that the kāwanatanga comes up with. And as Ngaio talked to us about the kind of many unjust laws that the kāwanatanga imposes, but to recognise that within Te Ao Māori there's also a system of law, which is where, you know, we would understand that authority of tino rangatiratanga as sitting within. Ngaio talked about how sovereignty, that kind of Western idea, or particularly European idea of what sovereignty is a different way of understanding authority than a concept like mana might provide. And it's because mana sits within a kind of different social and legal and constitutional system. It gets its legitimacy in different kinds of ways its parameters and constraints are different than what sovereignty talks about, but it is a kind of in terms of thinking about the spheres of authority that Te Tiriti talks about, you can understand that there are these two spheres of authority that coexist, and what Te Tiriti does is bring them into a relationship and think about, or require us to think about, what does that relational space in between look like? How do we understand where the authority of Tino Rangatiratanga goes, and where tikanga will be the kind of guiding legal system.
Kia ora, yes, and I guess if we apply tikanga, you know, how would tikanga change if we honourably applied it? How would tikanga change the way decisions about kai are made today? Ngaio, do you want to jump in there around tikanga and kia ora?
Yeah, I think like working in the kai space, tikanga, I think a lot of people want to embrace tikanga, but I think about, like, if we're talking about what we did pre-Te Tiriti as well, in terms of our kai practices here in Aotearoa, everything was based in tikanga. Everything in Te Ao Māori is based in tikanga. And for me, again, I'm going to be the word nerd, but my papa taught me tika means correct and ngā is plural, so it's just the right way to do things. And it's I think what's happening at the moment in Aotearoa in terms of kai, I always quote Jessica Hutchings, we're eating coloniality. We've got a duopoly of supermarkets in Aotearoa, and we just have no options unless you grow your own kai. My favourite kupu for sovereignty or rangatiratanga or is motuhake, because motuhake means to literally harvest from the land. And I think at the moment it's just with what's happening in the current government, coalition government, I'll say that to be politically correct, probably. We're not given much choice in terms of getting kai from another source. The best thing is to learn and have your own kai and grow your own kai. It's a tricky one. I don't know. I'm a bit lost with that one. I'm overthinking, I think.
Yeah, sorry. It was we moved too quickly. We moved too quickly. We moved too quickly. Yeah, I was getting a few texts around tikanga, so I jumped in, but I probably shouldn't have done that. Yeah, because I mean, we want to get to, you know, what connections can we draw between land loss and hunger today at some point, but that's probably something for the next webinar. Is there anything else you want to share before we wind up? Is there anything you want to revisit? Is there anything that yeah, go.
I was thinking before, like, reflecting while you were speaking, Carwyn, about whakapūtanga again, and I was thinking about the flags. So that's something that I've particularly studied, was different flags across Te Ao. But one of the main things from He Whakapūtanga was that we got the whakapūtanga flag, and that enabled Māori to trade overseas. And it's obviously mainly in the North Island, and it was designed by James Busby, but since the eye roll across the motu. But that flag was something that came from He Whakapūtanga that enabled Māori to be able to trade separate from the British Crown. And I think that's something that's not really acknowledged or known as well. And it enabled us to completely separate from the British Crown. And this is all obviously in 1835, so prior to Te Tiriti or Waitangi. So we had the capability pre-Te Tiriti to trade and have our own Kai sovereignty. And then it all just changed after that, after the 1840. That good old date. But yeah, that's the only other thing that I was thinking of. But yeah, happy for more partai if there are any.
Yeah, that's a really good point around native trade and the reclamation about that. Do you want to add anything around native trade, Carwyn?
Oh, just that I think, yeah, that's a really good point. And that when you look at the adoption of the flag, he whakaputanga, you look at some of the things that are identified in Te Tiriti, you can see that engaging in economic activity is part of what's underpinning all those instruments. And importantly, as Ngaio pointed out, you know, that there are ways consistent with tikanga sitting within Te Ao Māori of engaging in economic activity. So, you know, thinking about the values that might underpin tikanga, you know, values of whakapapa, whanaungatanga, aitiakitanga, that doesn't mean a prohibition on economic activity. It just means you approach how you engage in that in quite a different sort of way.
Yeah, and that's yeah, that's something that you know, there has been a lot of kōrero from kaimotuhaki organisations that are wanting to re-establish native trade with our Indigenous brothers and sisters, and what that might look like. Just going to go get a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm going to see where they are.
I'm wearing a Turtle Island t-shirt today.
Oh, yes, let's give it a twirl. Stand up, show me.
Yeah. From our Ahunga over in Canada.
Can I just add one other thing about
absolutely,
that I think is important to recognise? And when we talk about tikanga, we're not talking about practices that are frozen sometime in the past, you know, whether in 1840 or earlier. Tikanga is grounded in a set of principles and values, but practices develop based on those values, but to meet the needs of the society as we change and develop and our environmental and social circumstances change. And that's, I tend to think that's part of the reason why I think it's important to understand tikanga as law, because we know that that's what legal systems do, that healthy legal systems respond and change to society's needs based on a kind of framework set of principles and understandings of the values of that society. And tikanga does the same thing. So when we talk about tikanga, it's not something frozen, unchanging, but something that is connected to key principles and practices and wisdom built up over generations that adapts to changing needs.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because we can, you know, always be Māori wherever we are, and sometimes that's not in our own spaces or places. Yeah, kia ora, that's a really good point. Ngaio, sorry, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just thinking about COVID, you know, how we'd shifted tikanga for tangi. I remember being at Ara, which is a polytech down here, and instead of hungiing, we had this is me flexing my te wai pounamu status. We had a massive piece of pounamu and we both just touched it at the same time instead of doing a hungi, you know, and that's that flexibility of tikanga, which I think is beautiful. Different from Kawa, but yeah, tikanga is really important, I think.
Yeah, kia ora. So I'm got a question for you both. Does the fourth article have any bearing on Kai with te taha wairua, rongoa, and the spirituality of Kai?
fourth article, like the what do you think, Carwyn?
Well, so first, I've seen a little bit of commentary around recently about the fourth article and how we ought to treat it, and in the one sense, obviously, part of that discussion kōrero that took place, and I think you can rightly understand as part of the agreement. I've seen some commentary of people saying, well, this was something that at Waitangi was very much part of the conversation, but wasn't necessarily a part of the discussion which took place at other signing sites. So there's a little bit of discussion about how we ought to treat it. I suppose in terms of, it does get introduced. The idea comes from the Catholic bishop who was there at the signing site, and his concern is primarily about how kind of religious freedom for those Māori who have converted to Catholicism. So his intention is not necessarily a protection of Māori ideas of tikanga or wairua. Having said that, I think it certainly does encompass those things and provide protections for them. Whether it adds a whole lot more than the guarantee of tino rangatiratanga, I'm probably not entirely convinced that it does add a whole lot more than that, because I think that is quite an all-encompassing kind of protection and does protect tikanga in all kinds of ways. And so, but I think, certainly when we think about what might be important dimensions of understanding the relationship with whenua and with kai, that would be, there certainly are kind of, I suppose, spiritual dimensions to those relationships that might be encompassed by that.
Yeah. I always think of that sort of like, I don't know, I'm very tūturu in my whakaaro about these kind of things. And I would always say, like, kei a koe te tikanga, take your but you do you. And whatever feels right, trust your puku. In terms of rongoa as well, it depends on your kaiako or your who's taught you about those things. But yeah, I don't. In terms of that, like the karahitana Christian side of it, I'm a bit yes. So that's just me being.
It is always quite nice when someone says kei a koe te tikanga, because someone kind of trusts you to make quite a decision based on what is right at the time, and it's something we as parents we say to our children quite a lot. Kei a koe te tikanga, maumahara tō mana ake, and we hope and pray that as we're glaring at them, they are doing the right thing. Oh, tēnā kōrua. So if there's any other pātai from our audience, please pop them in the chat. And yeah, thank you so much for, really grounding us in Te Tiriti and giving us some really full explanations. And I'm sorry that I condensed you both down to an hour to really explore. And like I said, it's really important, I believe, that we keep revisiting this to understand so that we can connect and, move forward with Te Tiriti at the forefront. So it's really important. Our next webinar series, we are going to move into the settlement process, and we're going to talk a bit about so what did land loss look like, and some of those impacts on our kai systems and our kai sovereignty, our kai motuhake. I'm wondering if Carwyn, you can start by giving us a little bit of a taster of where to from here for the next webinar, so that our audience know where we're going next, and can prepare them for some pātai that they might have And yeah, kia ora. Thanks, Carwyn. And then I'll go to you, Ngaio.
Okay. Yeah, well, so Ngaio talked to us about those different pieces of legislation, many of which were about the alienation of Māori land or the taking of Māori land. And so those, of course, form part of the kind of historical breaches of Te Tiriti that we're now grappling with. And where Ngaio finished off on the legislative part was by talking about the Treaty of Waitangi Act of 1975, which set up the Waitangi Tribunal and eventually provided a basis for the hearing of those historical claims and some of those issues, and for us as a country getting a better sense really of what had occurred, and that then leads into a process of, well, if there are all these breaches of Te Tiriti or of treaty principles, how are we going to provide some redress for that? And so for the last 30 years, we've had a sort of systematic process of the negotiation of settlement of historical treaty claims, and those settlements provide a range of things, sometimes return of land, that can be important for thinking about issues relating to Kai, as well as a whole lot of other things, obviously, but also provide for a range of different sorts of relationships with different government agencies, many of which are in the kind of social or economic development kind of space as well. And so it's not just the whenua in those settlements that becomes important for talking about these issues, but other aspects of those settlement agreements as well.
Yeah, kia ora, because often, you hear, we hear that treaty settlements have fixed the past, and that's full and final, like the whole full and final, that really triggers me when I hear that. Kia ora Ngaio.
I was just thinking it's going to be a great kōrero, I think, the next webinar. I'm obviously from Waikato, one of the first, and then also living in Kaitahu. So I think my experience with what we've dealt with, and then now Ngāti Tiata Te Waiohua, my iwi and Waiuku, we're just setting up our post-settlement government entity at the moment to do our settlement. So it's going to be probably a great Kai-based legal one.
Yeah, and it kind of, begs the question is how are we expect to rebuild food systems? We can't have kai motuhake without land motuhake. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing more from both of you. Is there any final words before we wrap up, Korua?
Land back. And free Palestine. And Iran. Every time.
Yeah,
Always.
kia ora Ngaio. Yeah, and again, I think that brings us to thinking about, although these issues have always been present for us, that there's I think a particularly important context for us to be talking about these matters of thinking about Indigenous authority and concepts of te rangatiratanga and what those mean, not just what's happening with our current government here, but how we might better understand and support some of those things that are happening internationally as well.
Yeah, tikatera. What we do here does have an impact on our Indigenous brothers and sisters, no tā wahine, and vice versa. So kia ora. Okay, kia ora. Thank you so much. Just really want to mihi to everyone who joined us today. just being in the room and being open to these conversations and wanting to learn more is really important and special. And I really want to acknowledge you for being here today, and would like you to join us at the next webinar. Just as I said, we're going to try and do a resource from this kōrero for the next two as well. So you're really thrilled with your pātai and how we can create that together. I'll leave us with a karakia, and I'll see you all again in a couple of weeks. Can I just ask Carwyn and Ngaio to stay on for just one more minute? That'd be awesome. Ka whakeria te tapu, kia wātea tiara, kia tūriki, kia whakataha ai, kia tūriki, kia whakataha ai, haumi e, hui e, tā kia. Mauri ora, kia koutou.
Hold up.